Buenas, buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chicklet, a podcast where I share my unfiltered reviews of books that I think women, Latinas, and millennials would enjoy. Please subscribe and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and YouTube at Chicklet Podcast, and enjoy today's episode on the book called The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. There are 352 pages in the book. The genres are psychological thriller, mystery, fiction, and suspense. The author, Freida McFadden, is a New York Times, #1 Amazon, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and Publishers Weekly bestselling author. She's a practicing physician specializing in brain injury who has penned multiple best-selling psychological thrillers and medical humor novels released only on Amazon. Freida's work has been selected as one of Amazon Editor's Best Books of the Year, and she is the winner of the International Thriller Writers Award for Best Paperback. Her novels have been translated into over 30 languages. Freida lives with her family and black cat in a centuries-old 3-story home overlooking the ocean, with staircases that creak and moan with each step, and nobody could hear you if you scream. Unless you scream really loudly, maybe. So funny. The writing style of today's book is first person. The main character, Millie, is talking to you, the reader, directly, and she's quite funny. I don't know if you've seen Kristen Bell's limited series on Netflix called The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window, but it's a parody of mystery thrillers, and this book kind of reminded me of that movie because of how ridiculous some of the characters are. So, for example, Millie is talking to the gardener, an Italian guy that barely speaks any English, and 3 times she says, gracias and hola to him as if like Spanish and Italian are the same thing. And she also recognizes how dumb she's being, but she almost like can't help herself. And it adds a bit of humor to it when she's like laughing at herself and being like, yo, you're so dumb. Another example that I'll get into, a little more later is there's this creepy little girl in the book, and Millie says this: "A little voice startles me in the middle of putting away the last load of dishes. I whirl around. Cecilia is standing behind me, her pale blue eyes boring into me, wearing a white frilly dress that makes her look like a little doll." And by doll, I'm of course talking about that creepy talking doll in the Twilight Zone that murders people. I didn't even see her come inside, and her mom is nowhere to be seen. Where did she even come from? If this is the part of the job where I find out she's actually been dead for 10 years and is a ghost, I'm quitting. Well, maybe not, but I might ask for a raise. So it's like Freida does a really good job of being funny and creepy at the same time. And it's a combo that I didn't know that I would enjoy reading. Let's get into lo bueno. The intro is a person wondering why cops didn't arrest them for the dead body when they were searching for the house. So automatically you're hooked. The first part of the book is from Millie's perspective, and Millie is an ex-con looking for work. We don't find out until toward the end of the book what she did that landed her in jail, but she went to jail for murdering a guy who was in the middle of sexually assaulting her best friend. She accepted the deal of going to jail for 10 years because the guy's family didn't want to go to trial and have their son be known as a rapist. Because Millie is an ex-con, it's imperative that she finds work or else she would be breaking parole and get sent back to jail. This is where Nina comes in. Nina is a stay-at-home mom with one child, and she hires Millie to be the housemaid. Millie is so confused as to why Nina needs Millie at all. She says this: "I bite back any kind of judgmental response. Nina doesn't work. She only has one child who's in school all day, and she's hiring somebody to do all her cleaning for her. I even saw a man in her enormous front yard doing her gardening for her. How is it possible she doesn't have time to cook a meal for her small family?" Nina is insufferable. She does some really fucked up things to Millie, like telling her the wrong information and then treating her like garbage for doing it wrong, even though it was Nina who messed up in the first place. She accuses her of throwing important papers out when Millie is almost certain that she didn't. Nina also accuses Millie of flirting with the gardener when she was just having a simple conversation. She speaks poorly of her right in front of her to her friends, saying how hard it is to find good help nowadays. Sometimes it feels like Nina has a split personality. She flips from hot to cold so rapidly. She claims that she's joking, but Millie is not so sure. And honestly, like there's so much more too. It's basically a lot of gaslighting, but I'll just leave it at that because I could sit here all day talking about how terrible Nina is. But Millie doesn't fight her because again, she needs this job. She has no other prospects and the job is a blessing. She's going to make it work no matter what. Nina's daughter, Cece, is 9 years old and she's super rude. She wears creepy Victorian ghost child outfits, like we mentioned before. And she stares at Millie like she can see right through her, right to her soul. And one of the first scenes that you realize Millie is in for it is when she prepares Cece a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because she's hungry. And Nina scolds her for trying to murder Cece, even though Nina never mentioned an allergy. And there was also a jar of peanut butter in the cupboard. So, like, why would you have that there and also never mention the allergy if she was actually allergic? And so at that point, we're convinced Millie's going to be haunted by the little girl or murdered by Nina. We aren't really sure which yet. And then there's also Enzo, and he is the gardener. He doesn't, like I said, he doesn't speak English, and he spends way too much time at their house working on their lawn. When Enzo first meets Millie, there's something in his expression that sends a chill down her spine, and then he shakes his head almost like he's trying to warn her. And between the writing style and this guy being at their home constantly, I almost laugh every time he's in a scene because he reminds me so much of the one character, Buell, in The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window. Like, it's creepy, but it's almost comedic creepy. Nina takes Millie up to where she'll be staying at the house because obviously she's a live-in housemaid, and Nina instantly notices something's wrong. A little ball of dread forms in the pit of her stomach. When she exits the stairwell to her room in the attic, she lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Later on, she realizes what was wrong. The lock to her bedroom is on the outside rather than the inside. So Nina peers down at the doorknob as if noticing it for the first time and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry about that. We used to use this room as a closet, so obviously we wanted it to lock from the outside. But then I converted it to a bedroom for the hired help, and I guess we never switched the lock. If somebody wanted, they could easily lock her in there, and there's only that one window looking out the back of the house, and it's painted shut. So this room could be a death trap." As Millie starts to participate in their lives, like doing school drop-offs and pickups, and Nina's friends come over the house, Millie starts to realize that literally every single person talks behind Nina's back about how crazy she is. It's revealed that she was institutionalized for a few months, a few years ago, because she was having hallucinations. This prompts Millie to go through Nina's medicine cabinet where she finds antipsychotic medication, and it causes Millie to be scared of her. I really don't like demonizing mental health conditions, so I will get more into that later in the Lo Malo portion of the episode. But yeah, about a quarter of the way through the book, I start to question how great Nina's husband, Andrew, really is. He's hot, he has a great job, lots of money, he cares for Nina's child, that's not his. And he stayed by her side through her psychotic episode. And he also wants to have kids with her. So it's almost like too good to be true. The second half of the book is from Nina's point of view, where we learn that Andrew convinced everyone in town with his money and power that she was hallucinating, that he was abusing her, and got her checked into a mental health facility where she was prescribed antipsychotic meds, when in reality, he really was locking her in the room and torturing her for a few days in the room that Millie is now sleeping in. But we don't know that. Like, Millie doesn't know that yet. Like, it switches perspective. And he tortures her for a few days at a time, every few months for the past few years. He would punish her for things she did wrong, like leaving the light on or not keeping up with coloring her hair. So he would do things like drug her, make her pepper spray herself, and have her pull out 100 hair strands. And if she didn't follow the punishment's directions like to a T, she would have to start the torture over. So Nina actually hired Millie because she knew that if anyone was able to get rid of Andrew, it would be the girl with the history of violence and the girl that was desperate for a job. Like, she was going to stay and she was going to do whatever needed to be done. And she also had the ability to kill someone. So Nina needed her. She had been faking how nasty she was so that Andrew would fall in love with Millie, leave Nina, and then Nina and Cece could escape the abuse. And I think that's part of the humor that of the book is that Nina was being super ridiculous and overselling her craziness to force Andrew to leave her. And her being so nasty also helped Millie fall in love with Andrew because Millie started to feel so bad for him that he was just this great, amazing guy and he was with this crazy, miserable, ugly lady. Andrew starts to save Millie from Nina, just like he originally saved Nina from her low paying job and being a single mom. So Millie and Andrew eventually sleep together and he kicks Nina out. And this is the perfect chance for her and Cece to escape with the gardener's help. Enzo's sister had died at the hands of her husband, so he feels like he has to avenge her death and help Nina, another battered woman, escape abuse. On like the second day of being with Andrew, he locks Millie in the tortured bedroom. He makes her do terrible things, just like he had been doing to Nina for several years. And once he opens the door to let her out after several days, like once she's completed the punishment, Millie pepper sprays him with the pepper spray that Nina left for her. Nina knew she would be tortured eventually, and so she was helping her by leaving the pepper spray behind. So once Millie sprays him, she's able to get him in the torture room and does torture him to death. So this liberates them all from him. And I was wondering, like, okay, how is this bitch that just went to jail for murdering someone and she just murdered someone else? Like, how is she gonna get off the hook? Turns out the lead investigator was the father of one of Andrew's exes, and he saw how traumatized she was by him, so he decided to rule his death an accident. So they're off the hook, and Millie saved Nina. Yay! At Andrew's funeral, we learned that his mom abused him as a child by pulling out his teeth when he wouldn't brush his teeth, and the whole thing was just wildly fucked up. The last scene of the book is Millie getting hired by a woman after Nina recommended her. The woman has a bruise on her neck, and it's understood that she's not actually hiring Nina to be a housemaid, and instead it's to kill her abusive husband, just like she did with Nina. It's giving, like Dexter, where it's like a murderer, but like a good murderer. For the Cheesemate portion, I want to read this article written by Sam Dillon Flinch. He's the mental health and chronic conditions editor at Healthline. He's also a blogger behind Let's Queer Things Up, and he writes about mental health, body positivity, and LGBTQ plus identity. As an advocate, he's passionate about building community for people in recovery. You can find him on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or learn more at samdillonflinch.com. The article is titled, "If We Want to End Mental Health Stigma, It'll Take More Than Talking. Brave conversations need to happen, but we need to think bigger if we want to end stigma for good." More than half of Americans with a mental health condition still remain untreated, impacted by a deep societal stigma that leaves us reluctant to reach out. According to the American Psychiatric Association, stigma results in reduced hope, lower self-esteem, increased symptoms, difficulties at work, and a lower likelihood of maintaining your treatment plan. People with mental illnesses, especially with less understood conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, are still widely believed to be dangerous, untrustworthy, incompetent, and despite experience and evidence showing this is rarely the case. In fact, people with schizophrenia are more likely to be the victim of violence rather than the perpetrator. Still being labeled crazy by what feels like much of society can feel like a shameful burden that few are willing to take on. And even the jokes we make, like calling ourselves so OCD when we wash our hands or bipolar when our mood shifts, it leads to others taking these disorders less seriously. The stigma is intensified further for historically marginalized groups like people of color, women, LGBTQIA+, people who have traditionally been depicted as crazy or unstable due to prejudice, increasing their mistrust of the mental health system. This is exactly what happened with Nina in the book. Her husband had all this money and this power, and he convinced everyone, her new friends, everyone in town, everyone at the school, that she was crazy and that if at any point she started to talk about hallucinations, to let him know so that he could reinstitutionalize her again, when it's like he was abusing her. And so it's like, I know that this is a fictional book, but it's like we have to be really careful of like calling people crazy and just treating people with mental health conditions poorly, because it'll further isolate them and further their negative experiences. So I just want to be really, I want to be mindful of that. And feel free to obviously look more into that. For Lo Malo, honestly, if this book wasn't meant to be funny, then I think maybe that would be the only bad thing, that it made me laugh, even though it was supposed to be darker. Maybe the characters could have been developed more, but it was a quick, easy read. Other than that, I really liked everything about it. The next book that I want to read by Freida McFadden is obviously I have to read The Housemaid's Secret. It's the next book where we follow Millie to the next house where the woman is being abused by her husband. I'm sure there's like a snarky twist, but I'm looking forward to another fun read. It feels weird calling it fun when it's about like abuse and it's a thriller and suspenseful and like people are dying, but it was a fun read. It was funny. I took it that way. I looked it up and I don't even think it was supposed to be funny. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. New episodes are uploaded on Friday mornings. You can follow me on social media and YouTube at Chick Lit Podcast. And remember, if you have any book recommendations, send them my way. Thank you for listening.